I just, as we're getting started, want to say thank you to Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare. This is, again, Share Your Story, Advocacy through Earned Media. And this is the third part of our 3-part advocacy series. And Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare sponsored this series. So we really appreciate them making it possible for us to do these events. And in addition, we just want to say thank you to our advocacy network. This is a group of organizations that contribute a little extra toward MAMP's mission of advocating for the nonprofit sector and get a little bit additional benefits in terms of connecting with advocacy issues, connecting with one another, and just feeling more connected to advocacy in general. If you're interested in joining that group, be in touch with me afterward, and we can connect about the details of what that looks like. Okay, so as I said, this is Share Your Story, Advocacy through Earned Media. And we are really lucky to have a panel of 3 phenomenal guests here with us. I'll do quick bios for them so you all can hear about who they are. So first of all is David Dahl, is a veteran journalist and currently works as the editor at the Maine Monitor. Maine Monitor is a MAMP member, so thank you. He recently was the deputy managing editor at the Boston Globe and previously served as the paper's political editor. Next up is AJ Douglas, who's a reporter for Fox Bangor, ABC7. She just moved to Maine from Atlanta, Georgia, is originally from Atlanta, Georgia, and came via the Midwest, and is passionate about storytelling. She recently did a news piece on the workforce shortage impact on Maine's nonprofits following our April MAMP Connects program. So that was great coverage. If you all didn't get to see that, I highly recommend it. And we're excited to have a TV reporter joining us today, so you all get some experience connecting to that side of things. And then Susan Sharon is the deputy news editor at Maine Public, also a MAMP member. And Susan initially worked as a State House reporter for Maine Public Radio, focusing on politics, labor, and the environment. And more recently, she's been covering corrections, social justice, and human interest stories. So we are delighted to have this group of folks join us. And there's so many questions for us to go through. And so I just want to, I'm going to stop my screen share now, actually, so we can all take a look at the folks who are joining us, and you can all say hello. And I'm going to get started with a question that I think will help just sort of ground us a little bit as we think about why is it important for our missions that we do advocacy through media? How can media help us tell the story of the work that we are doing? And what is the best way to make those connections with the media? And so I would love to hear, we have 3 different mediums represented here. And so I'm hoping that we can start, maybe we can go David, AJ, Susan to start. And I would love to just hear a little bit about what your kind of daily schedule looks like and how you go about organizing what stories to choose and what your beat looks like. And David, let's start with you.
Great, thanks everyone for joining us. Thanks to MAMP for its help and support of our nonprofit and others around the state. So a typical day for a journalist, that's sort of an oxymoron, really. That's kind of why we all have gotten into this. But I'm generally getting up, somewhere around 6:30 or so, reading the local papers, reading usually some version of the Times, either one of their newsletters or their site in the Post, and going through any emails that might have come through overnight or that I didn't get to the night before. I generally have calls or Zoom meetings with folks starting around 9 or 9:30, either supporters, newsmakers. I've been doing this job for only about 8 weeks, so I'm doing a lot of outreach. We have a staff meeting on Tuesday, and then I have individual reporter meetings on Monday. We have 3 full-time reporters and a part-time reporter and I'm usually checking in with them on Monday, and then we have the staff meeting on Tuesday, and then I'm in contact with them during the week. Thursday and Friday are usually editing days. Somewhere in there, I'm also talking with our terrific multimedia editor multiple times, either about our newsletter, our social media presence, or the presentation on our website. There's probably a whole bunch of other stuff that I do that I can't think of. Not a Zoom time. I'm working primarily 4 days a week from our home in Friendship. I go once a week to our office in Augusta.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah, you're right. There's a typical day is a little bit of an oxymoron, but that's a great intro at least. AJ, I would love to hear from you how that looks different with TV.
Thank you. Glad to be here. So with TV, we pretty much, a reporter's responsible to have at least 3 pitches every day. However, sometimes in a market where it's like a big, small market, your assignment manager might already have a story assigned. So it depends if I already know what I'm doing or if I don't know what I'm doing. But typically, I get to work 30 minutes early every day. They think I'm crazy. I don't know. I might take that time to watch the show. The person sitting next to me, good friends with him, but I might not know what story he did the day before. So you want to know what your market is putting out there. I want to see what the competitor is putting out there. So I'm pretty ambitious. I'm pretty aggressive. So I do those things, or I might look for story ideas. I usually do my story ideas the day before, the night before, but that's time to see what's fresh, because about TV, we tell you what happened or what's happening and staying current, which I'm going to talk about that more later. But we have a meeting. The first hour of my day starts the same every day, first hour. So we have a morning meeting, and that's when we get our assignments and we have confirmation on what we're going to do. My news station is a little unique because we do 2 separate stories a day. So after that, after 10 a.m., it's a toss up. You never know. I'm gunning for interviews. It's my biggest thing. So finding interviews and working around other people's schedules. Also, I have to do time management and logistics. Is it an hour away or is it 30 minutes away? Because that's important. I have a deadline. I call it a very gracious deadline. My deadline is 6 o'clock every day. So most news stations is 5 o'clock, which is troubling to me, but I'm happy to say mine is 6 p.m. So that's called a day turn. So that means I'm turning a story, or in this case, 2 stories within about 5 hours. So you have to learn a lot and condense it to 1 minute and 40 seconds or 45 seconds, depending on if it's a mini story or actual, what we call package. So sometimes people might be like, oh, your story was so short. I'm like, actually, that was really long in broadcast. So yeah, so after I do my interviews, I'm going to, I have to write it myself. I'm going to shoot it myself with the camera. I'm going to edit it myself. I get a writing approval for everything that I write. Nothing I write just goes on television. So it's going to be approved by Anchor, who's been doing this much longer than myself. And then I meet my deadline. After the deadline, some people think it's a happy ending, but we have back end work. I have to write a web article. I have to archive my video that I edited and get pictures and put it all on the website. And then I'm done. So that's what my day looks like. It's a little crazy, it can be a little weird, but we're a team and everything's a domino effect in a newsroom. So we just work together and make it work. And that's what a day looks like.
AJ, I'm sort of exhausted just from that description. But that's, I guess, a parallel between nonprofit workers and journalists is working perhaps too longer than we should. So thank you for sharing that insight. It's really helpful. Susan, I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having us. It's good to be here. I guess my day is sort of a combination of what David and AJ said. I usually get on my computer at about 7:30 in the morning, and I'm scanning the news and also emails from reporters, emails that have come in overnight, it's always email management. That's a huge part of the job. And I appreciate the emails, by the way. It's helpful to get pitches, press releases that way. But basically my job is to see what we have coming in the morning and figure out what we're missing that we really need that day. We cover the state of Maine. It's a team of about 20 people, including our call-in show, Maine Calling. That's a once-a-day show. And so I'm looking to see, what are we missing? What big stories should we have today in the news agenda? And then at 9:30, I have a call with, there's 4 editors, and we have a chat and kind of bat some ideas around, see what we have in the mix, see what we need to jump on and who we're going to assign it to. And then my job is really to run the daily news agenda, to, you know, talk to the reporters, get them going on something if they haven't gotten going on it, see what they're pitching to us, and then assign them. We usually have stories for the day that are coming in for the newscast, which are shorter, shorter bits of news that go in throughout the day. You know, that's probably like, as AJ sort of described, it's like the minute story. That's a short, quick thing, and those are multiple times a day. And then we have longer features. Sometimes those features are turned around in a day if it's a big story, like a politics story that's breaking, or they're features that reporters have been working on for more than a week, sometimes weeks at a time. And we figure out which day makes sense for those to air, or whether it's a breaking story and it has to be aired that day right away. But that's how it works. And I would say that the favorite stories for reporters, in addition to the breaking news, are the stories that they have developed on their own, that come from their beat, that somebody, maybe one of you has pitched to them and are working with them alone, and it's taken some time to do, and they're rich with different points of view and a scene and maybe some tension in the story, but a really good story that they're excited to get out there. And most reporters can't wait they're very competitive and they want to own it themselves. That's the best, and break a story if they can.
That's great. I love these insights that we are getting already. It's really helpful and interesting for me to hear the small differences and some of the overlap too between the 3 of you. There's one more sort of grounding question that I thought would be interesting to just talk a little bit about, the different audiences that you all have. And so I think that as nonprofit organizations, we are a little bit aware of the audiences that we tend to serve and kind of who we're targeting. And I think it can be really helpful to know a little bit more about the audience that you tend to have as your representation, your medium, so that we can think a little bit about who is the best person for the media for us to be pitching our stories to. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that, about kind of the audience that you have and how do we craft pitches to fit that, and how to figure out what kind of press your organization, our organizations maybe are best suited to. And maybe I'll go reverse this time. So Susan, I'll start with you, and then AJ and
I think this is the most important question, really, when you're figuring out who is best to carry your message. And it is important to know the audience. Like, the 3 of us are very different. We have a statewide audience, as I said, but we are limited. We're not like a daily newspaper in terms of the breadth and scope that we can present stories with every day. We've got a certain amount of airtime that we need to fill, and sometimes that's a feast of things coming in, and sometimes it's a famine. And so if you know your audience, what I would mainly say is, we are looking for stories at Maine Public Radio. Different than the paper, that there's more pages and space to fill. They might be able to do more sort of community news. We're looking for stories of statewide interest. And that doesn't mean that it couldn't be something happening in a town or something small. if it's something that we think has appeal to the bigger statewide audience and illustrate some kind of a policy or something else that might be replicated in another town, for example. So what I usually tell people is what we're looking for are stories, and that isn't just an event. It's not a promotion of someone. It's not something internal. It's a story, you know, it has tension in it and people in it and something to illustrate. And if you have that, then your job is to figure out whether you want to pitch that you want to make a pitch to a reporter specifically because you understand that it's something on their beat, which means you do need to know what the reporter covers, or it's something more general that you're going to put in a press release and try to, you know, make a hit with multiple media outlets. But it is important to know sort of the audience and the reporters and the beats. And if you know that, there's no harm in reaching out and giving it a shot with a you know, an email or a phone call. I prefer email, and see what they say to you. You can always ask. There's no harm in that.
That's great. Yeah, and helpful to know the preferences for email versus phone, how to get in touch. That's really helpful too. Yeah, AJ.
Okay, so for that, it's a little different. For television, again, I'm working on such a small metric, right? So I'm reporting what's happening. I'm reporting what's current. So how can you make your message and what you're passionate about in your organization and what you're advocating, how can you make that current? Well, I would say a small event like a rally or a march or something simple. But for me, it's more so what's in my what we call DMA. And all that means is our service area. So for example, if you don't get Channel 7 or Fox 22, then it probably won't be relevant for you to identify with my particular news station that I work for, but you might want to identify with the news station in your area and sending an email like a press release. The only reason why I don't say pitch, a pitch is more so something like coming from a reporter. It's going to carry more credibility. I would say a press release, which is simple, saying who, what, when, where, what is this? Why is this? Why is it important? What is it about? Briefly in one page, and putting a contact number on there or a contact email. And whoever that contact is, you'd be surprised. Make sure they're okay with us calling them. So, and okay with doing on-camera interviews. So if you were to turn on your TV and you didn't see anything, you didn't see an image and you didn't hear a voice, how would you know that your TV's on? So you would be surprised. People reach out to television networks, but they don't want to go on camera. And I'm not allowed to film anything. So that means what you have isn't for television. That if you're not comfortable with that, or your supporters are not comfortable with that, then you probably want to reach out to your local newspaper in that such scenario. So again, I can always identify what's compelling. Some people think it's not a story, and it is. So as a strong writer, I can make it compelling, and I can identify what this story truly is. But you have to just kind of be open to that. With sharing. So also reach out to media when you're open to sharing and telling your story, because that's what it's really about.
That's great. Yeah, David, go ahead.
Great. It's really interesting to hear everybody describe this. The Monitor is publishing stories basically once a week on the weekends. We're looking for exclusives and enterprise. We are a statewide news organization. We have an audience that includes 5,000 or so people who follow one of our 3 newsletters. Our material is also distributed and republished by other publications. So you'll see Maine Monitor stories appear in the Portland Press Herald, the Bangor Daily News, Spectrum News, and occasionally the Maine Public Radio. We are primarily set up to do investigative and in-depth stories. Our mission statement says we engage readers to participate and connect to create a better Maine. What that means is, we're often shining a light on problems. We have 3 primary reporters, one who covers public health, one that covers the environment, one that covers statewide accountability, And we have a couple freelancers, one that is actually doing a story on the transgender communities that'll be coming out in the next week or two, a series of stories that I encourage you all to read. And then we have another reporter who's a columnist who covers the environment, writes a column every couple of weeks. So those are sort of the buckets. I mean, obviously, if something is outside that realm, we do have some freelancers as our budget allows. We just published a story, for example, about an education funding case that's sitting before the U.S. Supreme Court. It's going to be kind of a big deal since it started in Maine, and a lot of you might be familiar with already. So that's generally the idea. As far as contacting us, our contact information is on our website, themainmonitor.org. I'd encourage you to follow us on Twitter and sign up for one of the newsletters as well.
That's great. Yeah, it's really interesting to hear kind of AJ, especially, and Susan too, that the stories they want are the ones that are really current, the ones that tend to be of the day. And so if you're working on an event or something like that, there is a fire alarm. Sorry if you can hear that. I think it'll stop. And those of you who need less time, maybe David can do it. The less timely ones David can do. I'll ask another question and then mute myself so you don't hear the fire alarm. I would love to hear about press releases. A, when you would like them, the time of day, and B, if you like them long or short. And I'll let you all answer with, I'll mute myself.
Okay, well, I'll start. I like to get press releases a few days ahead of time. And it sort of depends on what the press release is about. But if it's something that I think could be a good story for one of our reporters, it's great. And if it, as AJ made a great point about driving time, I feel like I know, having been a reporter for so many years here in Maine, I can pretty much tell how long it's going to take anyone to get somewhere and get back on deadline and in time to produce a story if they have to. But a few days is good if we're going to do a full-length feature story. And, I'll give you an example of something that worked really well recently. It was a press release that came out from Maine Rivers about an event that was happening. I think we got about a week's notice, maybe a little bit more. And what was great is I love it when people send something out like a week or two ahead of time, and then they remind me because it's helpful. But they sent us a press release about this event, about a dam removal, fish restoration project that was happening on China Lake, and these alewives were going to be returning to China Lake for the first time in 200 years. And for some reason, so that was a regular press release. It was something we would get. There was going to be an event with the governor and a celebration of this thing. And, we could have just covered the celebration. We might not have covered it. But what was great that they did was they gave us the opportunity to meet with people ahead of time, ahead of the event on the river. There was a scene, there were people who had worked on the project. And so with some advance notice, and because they set it up, the timing worked well ahead of that event, that we could run the story the day of the celebration or the day after the celebration. And that story ended up getting picked up on Twitter by National Public Radio. And once you have that global response, it just went bananas on social media, and it reached like 1.4 million people or something like that. So it was just a fluke. It was just people. It's a kind of story people, I think, are anxious to hear. It's like good news, weird stuff, because I don't think everybody really read the story and saw that the fish actually weren't just mysteriously returning. Something had happened. I think they just thought it was magic. But anyway, I guess my point is just timing and thinking about how it might play, and knowing also your audience, because if you do get something like that and it goes global with NPR, it's just gold. So.
Okay. And for that one, press releases. I have no idea what I'm doing tomorrow when I go into work. So if you were to send a press release a day before, that's fine. That's perfectly fine. One day in advance is perfectly fine. If you want to send it a week and ahead, then please remind us a day in advance, because we usually get our assignments literally one day in advance with television. And also, if it starts at 9 a.m., it's helpful for us to know that, so I can come, because we usually start work at 9 a.m. So we would need to know in advance so we can get there on time, right? Again, with press releases, you don't have to, but I do always say, like, think about including how, who, what, when, where, why. Even if it seems obvious to you, that's helpful information so we can understand if this is a newsworthy story. And a communications person information. If your organization doesn't have a communications person, that's fine. The best person to speak to this event, we need their information. They have to be open to speaking to us. Television can be a little tricky. And I'll share this. Even reporters, we get a little nervous when we have to go what we call live, when we're live. Because if I say something and I want to say, you know what, I don't like how I said that. The grammar wasn't, no, let me change this. It doesn't work like that on live television. So it can be a bit, I don't want to say stressful, but we understand when someone's not open to going on camera, but just think about the message that you're telling and how powerful that message is and how you can best tell that I can't. So interviews are very important when you're thinking about this press release and you're thinking about even inviting the media. Interviews are vital. We need to speak to at least 1 to 2 people. So just keep that in mind. Again, you know, conducting interviews, that's how we can best write the story, by conducting more interviews, right? Oh yeah, and of course, answer the phone and stuff like that. So little things like that. But yeah, literally a day in advance works best for television. Literally one day, that's all I need.
So we're focused on investigations, enterprises, trends. So spot news is generally not in our bailiwick. You know, there are a few exceptions. We jumped on the when the abortion story leaked. We did a daily story off of that, and periodically, if there's an update on it and a story that we have done, we'll do a spot story. So a lot of our stuff is not driven by press releases at all. Generally, I'd say at the beginning of the week would be better than the end of the week. All of the stuff that everybody else said, the 5 W's, you know, why this is a story, just to sort of caution, and I imagine I'm probably not going to be able to prevent myself from saying this a couple times here, but we're not set up to do sort of stories that promote your organization. That's not why we're existing. We're looking, as Susan said so eloquently, looking for stories, you know, tension. In our case, you know, frankly, some quasi-investigative stuff, or fully investigative, something that's revelatory.
I will be filling in. Hi, everyone. I'm Kelly. I'll be filling in for Mary Alice. David, that raises a great point. We had a question in registration from an organization that primarily works with children. And so they have a lot of, you know, very sad tales to tell, but they're committed to sharing only positive, strength-based stories as it aligns with their mission. But it seems that often the stories that get told are the more sad ones. So what are your recommendations for keeping to our commitment to making a strong pitch and maintaining positivity? And can you talk about maybe the balance you have to face in each of your outlets?
That's great. I'll take this one first, if that's okay with you all, Susan and AJ. So in our case, as I said, we're sort of shining a light on the gaps, the shortcomings, the things that aren't quite working, whether it's healthcare in rural areas or the sort of tragic death of a couple of residents at a nursing home, the story we had a couple of days ago, or projects that might be occurring, environmental stories in rural Maine. So to answer the specific question, obviously this questioner wouldn't like the tone that we would be taking. We actually had a series, I think a year or so ago, about a couple of child deaths in Maine. It was really quite, terrible and emotional. I guess the way your group, to sort of put the hat on of an advocate for a second, might fit into that story is if we are trying to present solutions. There is a whole strain of thought within journalism right now called solutions journalism. There's actually a solutions journalism network. And so structuring a story from the Monitor standpoint, perhaps there could be an example after we have defined the problem and the terrible thing that has happened, and here's how it could work, and here's a better outcome. So I would imagine that could be a way where you could kind of position your story. It would be the good part. Here's how it's supposed to work, kind of thing.
I think that's really well said, David. I don't know how many, to be straight, I don't know how many stories you would be able to really place that are just of sort of this, here's good things that are happening for kids. The way, I think David's right. The way that you would get into a story is we have to identify what the challenge is first, and then plug the voice in of what's working, or an example of someone who can share something else to address that issue in the story to make it be a story, really. And you might be successful getting, maybe one or two of those kinds of stories out. But otherwise, I think it's really something, you might think about a show like Maine Calling, if they're taking up a topic that has to do with with an issue where that person, that somebody that you're representing is the guest on the show that can talk about something that has worked well. But I think David's really right. It's thinking about solutions journalism and fitting it into an overarching challenge or problem. It's well said.
Yeah, I think you both answered that one very well. I'll echo that with saying, yes, we as journalists, we identify what the conflicts are, what the barriers are, and hopefully in a story, what we've reported on, I also identified a solution. But also, I guess the only thing different I would say is making sure you're ready to tell your story and to be really honest in doing that. So when you're ready to tell your story, we do have to, if there is a conflict that exists, then you would need to identify that, because I only write what I report. It's all nonfiction, so just making sure you're absolutely ready. And if you say, hey, this is a struggle that we're facing, but this is the attitude that we're going about it, then we would of course include that in the story. So just project that when you're speaking with a reporter. If you're saying, hey, I don't want it to seem so dim, then project that light, I suppose, within your interview, because we're going to, basically mimic that in our writing.
Thank you. I'm back. And thank you, Kelly. It's a great question that came in ahead of time. And we have a link that I think Kelly can drop in the chat about ethical storytelling, which I think is a really helpful frame when thinking about this kind of question. The next one we have, and I'll let you all kind of answer as you need. When can we know that we can tell a reporter and trust that it will be off the record and won't be quoted? We have a lot of HIPAA restrictions and government relations considerations, but we want to be helpful when we can. I'll let you all choose who answers first.
I don't mind starting that one. That is a really good question. I remember my anchors used to ask me, how do you get them to say such compelling things? How do you get them to say, you really get people to open up? You would be so surprised. When I know I'm handling something that's very, very, very delicate, I let them know within the interview. I say, okay, well, I'm going to ask some personal questions. And if you don't want to answer them, then you can just let me know you're not ready or you want to move forward. The official answer is to simply say I want this off the record, and we won't use it. But I know I'm in a smaller market, so I know some people may not know that. So just again, as to work ethically, me personally, I will let you know. But when I say things like that, like you don't have to, or this, they feel more comfortable with me and they actually open up a lot more. So, but yeah, anytime you don't want to, you want to still let us know what's going on, but you don't want to be quoted. For our credibility, we never want to misquote anyone. So simply say that, simply say, I don't want this on the record, or you can verbatim say off the record, and it will be off the record.
That's great. Yeah, I see nods. Oh, yeah, David, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think just to add on that, that's exactly right. Reporters are, professional. They honor the off the record situation. I think obviously the more comfortable you are with the reporter you're working with, the more likely you're going to trust them and tell them stuff. We like that, of course. But that doesn't mean we're going to publish it or attribute it to your name. I mean, we operate with a lot of background tips and guidance to pursue, and often the follow-up question for us is, okay, you can't be quoted on this. How would you suggest we go and find that? And sometimes that source will steer us to a document. Steer us to another source, and that becomes helpful, and that's part of the reporting journey. So this would be an area where some of your organizations would do well to kind of develop a relationship of our reporters in their beat areas for that time when we do need to talk to them on background, or they need to talk to us on background to suggest something that something really interesting is going on over here, but I can't have my name attributed to it.
Yep, I would just agree. It's ruinous for a reporter to violate your trust, and you probably aren't going to talk to the reporter and tell them something off the record unless you trust them in the first place, as David and AJ said. And I guess this sort of just segues for me to something that I always like to tell people, which is that, if we get something wrong in a story, or you don't think we got it right, and you have a complaint about it, you should definitely let us know, because we can't fix it if we don't know and no one tells us. And sometimes, there's sort of like it's a funny way things work, which is that, if one media outlet reports it and has something slightly wrong, and that gets picked up by the Associated Press, or someone else piggybacks on it, and there's something not quite right in the story, it can just become this screwed up chain of bad news. So it's good reporters like to hear feedback, and we try to be responsive and transparent about that. That's our job. So if you don't like it, that will help with the trust business, I think.
That's great. Yeah, I think all of those are great points. We've had a couple questions in the chat about building a press list, building your contact list. And something AJ said earlier, I think highlights one of the reasons that it's so important to build those relationships individually, and why MAMP doesn't have just like a generic press list, is because, looking at how many 60 people that we have here now, you all represent different geographic areas, different topics, different sectors within the nonprofit area. And so the list that might be generic may not be what your specific organization needs. So you really have to develop those relationships. But I'm curious if you all have advice about how to kind of develop those relationships, how you kind of think about becoming the go-to source. I think like that's something that a lot of organizations really want to be, is like, how do I put myself as the organization to go to about X or Y issue? And then if you have tips about how to build a good press contact list, that would be great too.
I guess I could start with that one. And I would say just knowing who is in your area, knowing what media is in your area and consuming media is helpful. So you can kind of educate yourself on what media is in your area and what kind of stories are putting out there. A lot of people tell me, oh, I don't watch TV because I'm a TV news reporter. And I'm like, me neither, but I watched it on the internet. But anyway, I would say just start. You just have to start. A lot of my contacts, I did one story and then I did another story with them. Then I did another story, and it's a continuation. Stay in touch. If you have one event or one story with us, especially with media, because we turn day turns. So we're going to need a story 365 days a year. So it's never like, this isn't a big enough story. No, we want to do it. We'll just do like a mini story or something. So if something's happening and you want to let us know, do that and just continue to build on top of it. You don't have to work with the same reporter or anything. You can work with any of the few reporters that we have, but just start. You have to kind of just start by putting yourself out there. And then you'll kind of see that growth and that building happening.
I think this is a tough one to answer, but I'll give it a shot. I think it does take time, just like any relationship. It takes time and nurturing, and so probably, I guess I'll speak for myself. The people that I think reporters I have really appreciated. People who reach out to me personally and pitch me a story that they think is in my wheelhouse, when I've been a reporter in the past. That's what I love the most. And I love it when they keep calling me back or trying, and they don't give up on me if I can't do the story one time or another, but they still reach out. I think reporters appreciate that. And I think if you give them a good story, at least one good story, they're going to pick up the phone or answer your email when you do it again, even if they can't do that second story. I just see that happening with our team, that they really do appreciate, as I said earlier, when you give them a story for that person alone, something, a really good pitch that's on their beat, that they might be able to break a story about, that they can own, that's what they love.
Well, Susan, we want all the exclusives. So I put our contact information in the chat. Most of that is set up there's an anonymous tip aspect to that, and then there's individual contact information on the site as well. I think I agree with what everybody said. I mean, it's about developing a relationship with a reporter. So I'll just sort of let that all stand there.
That's great. I think those are all excellent tips. And I just want to highlight that there's great comments happening in the chat that have some additional tips. So if you have not been checking that out, I highly recommend you review that too, because there's all sorts of expertise and answers in there as well. And Susan and David, something you all just mentioned brought up one other question that was asked ahead of time is, how do you balance and how do you decide when to give an outlet an exclusive versus sending out a broader press release? And I think that's a really tricky question to kind of know when, but I think any insight there would be great.
In our case, I just defined the beats, healthcare, environment, state public accountability. That would be the place to go, I think. And the pitcher needs to sort of know the organization, So I've just said we don't do a lot of spot news. So, pitching us on a story that is happening like right today is probably not going to work. I mean, pitching us on a story that we could say something is going to happen in one of those beat areas, that might work. So that's sort of a robust advance is the term generally. So we know a town is about to unveil a mega development. We just did this big story about this development with the gigantic flagpole up in Columbia Falls. If we know that there's something like that is about to happen and we get a heads up a few days before, we could do that story and pop it on Sunday in preparation for Monday. I wouldn't be surprised if my colleagues here have the same thought. So that's know the beats.
Yeah, I think this, if I understand this correctly, is this a question about reach? Like what's the best way to reach the right audience, right? Is that what you're
Yeah,
asking?
and how do you
Yeah.
and to maximize your reach?
Yeah, so to me, this is just, again, the question about like knowing your audience, and it is tricky. It really is, because it's competitive. Everything is competitive. Like getting a story placement is competitive. Getting somebody to pay attention to your press release is competitive. It's for your time, and it's for with the media competitive. So I think it's really being savvy about sort of knowing, like, for example, what have the newspapers been covering? Does your thing make a nice follow-up to what the newspapers have been covering? Is it something television is going to love because it's really visual and it's a quick turn and it's like maybe summer and it's slow and they're going to jump on it? Or is it something that you can imagine, because you're a savvy public radio listener, that you could hear on national public radio, that it's sound rich and it has a good scene and some good players, and it's like what NPR seems to love Maine twang, which is, we don't really love that term, but that if it's a story that sort of speaks to a sense of place about Maine, you might, and it might just play well on national public radio or regionally on public radio, but it really does require you to understand the audience and the potential. And you might, again, like I said before, you could just reach out to us and ask us. And I have no problem saying, I think this would be great on public radio, or it won't work, or maybe you should try the paper or the Monitor, or call AJ because it's dynamite in her area. That's what I would say. I wouldn't hesitate to do that.
Thanks, Susan. Shameless pitch, right? It's about, some things are a lot deeper and it has nothing to do with your organization and nothing to do with anyone. It's just some things are deeper within the market and news itself. I used to work at the number one TV news station in the area. Now I work at the number 3 TV station in the area. No one thinks about those things though. They just have their preference of which station they're going to watch. So exclusives are kind of like, at my news station, it depends on the reporter is what I say. So exclusives, when it comes to a story, it's rare that I'm going to get an exclusive. I have a sister station in Portland. So if I have a story that they like, I'm going to send it to Portland. So that's also a good thing. Your story could have a lot more reach than what you think, so you can get your message out there. So just some things are within the industry. So when it comes to like an exclusive story and you feel like, you have a relationship with me and you want to scoop me, but you also want your story on other news outlets that day, no offense taken, it's okay. The way I tell the story, no one's going to tell it like me. So I'm going to make it feel exclusive, but don't worry about that. But it's up to you. It's totally at your discretion if you feel like you want to do an exclusive story in that way. Or for example, if there's a story that, like David said, is happening next week, you wanted to get with David a week in advance, and then you wanted to get with your TV station maybe the day before it actually happened. So technically you gave David's news outlet the actual exclusive. So that way it's kind of like a win-win, because you gave somebody exclusive, but you also got your story told on another media outlet. So that's a very clever way to do it. And again, it's not like you're stepping on anyone's toes. It's totally fine. It's just that medium. So that would be smart to talk to maybe your local paper a week in advance about something that's upcoming, and then talking to your news station that's local the day before, so we can go ahead and do that day turn. That's just how the industry works. And reporters, actually, in the market I work in, I know how to get exclusive video or exclusive interviews. I know how to do that with other stories, so it's okay. So that's my best recommendation of being strategic like that, so you can get your message out there in different media outlets. So that would be smart. Just pay attention to timing.
That's great. Oh yeah, David, go ahead.
I just don't want to put it back on the, I want to put it back on the organizations a little bit. Don't underestimate your own channels. So, you should retweet a story that you like, that is in your interest, that we might have written. I mean, we did some stories about substance abuse in the last few weeks. A big chart about statewide overdose deaths, and another one about uninsured facilities that handle uninsured folks that are trying to withdraw. And I think I noticed that somebody from Milestone is on this. I mean, I don't know if they retweeted that story or the chart, but I know a few advocates did. And that's sort of, from your messaging standpoint, that I would imagine that helps you all, and it raises the issue that you're advocating for and you're trying to solve with your organization.
Thank you. So somehow we have 7 minutes left only. I feel like there's like a million other questions that I wanted us to be able to get to. So I'm going to ask the question that Megan asked in the chat, because I think it's a great one. But if there are other questions that we haven't gotten to yet, feel free to throw it in the chat and see if your colleagues and peers can help answer it while we're still on the line. So Megan asked, at times common language used in media that holds considerable sway inadvertently perpetuates storylines that are inaccurate, e.g. use of language that implies anything as white and male is the norm for which all else is measured. How can nonprofits work to support more inclusive storytelling and use of language? That is a big question to answer in our last 5 minutes. And so if not all three of you want to answer that, that's fine. But I would love to talk about this one before we wrap up.
Go ahead, David.
If either of you want to go first.
Okay. Well, what I was just going to say, I think I understand this. You know what? We have had trainings. People have reached out to us and given us trainings on evolving language, particularly evolving language, because everything is evolving, and I think that's the great thing about being a journalist, to watch and see how it does. So if I understand this correctly, it is about that. And one of the things, I guess, one example I would give is just around substance use disorder. I mean, we used to throw around the term substance abuse, and I remember even I did a story myself, and I remember someone wrote to me. This is a few years ago, and said, and there was a story that went on NPR, and someone wrote, and was not scathing in the criticism, but said, Susan, this is not the language anymore. You need to start calling this what it is. It's substance use disorder. And I was just like, oh my God, we'll never be able to say that on the radio. It's just too long. But lo and behold, no, I had to evolve. We've evolved. That's what it is. So it's similar to that. We have had people come in and give us training about how language and practices are evolving, and it's incredibly helpful. It takes a little time, but it really does work.
Oh, that's great. Agreed on all parts. I probably used substance abuse instead of substance use, talking about that story a second ago. I and we as an industry have lots of work to do. I think that we've been doing some of that work over the last couple of years, plus in my case, decades, and a long ways to go. I think that one of the objectives that I had upon starting at the Monitor was to increase the diversity of voices and people that are contributing to the Monitor, as well as the people who we are covering. We've made some steps in that direction. There were steps underway before, as Megan knows, before I got here, and I hope that we can continue to do that. We're about to publish a story about, as I mentioned, transgender people living in Greater Maine. With that story, some may disagree with us, some may not, but we're also running a glossary to sort of bring the readers along to understand the terms that we're using. And frankly, we are checking and double checking to make sure that we're using inclusive language with that. We've also been careful to use inclusive language. Frankly, we've written about some folks in the prison system and the criminal justice system. Again, the language we're using there is not the same language we would have used to describe people who were imprisoned that we would have used a few years ago. So we've got work to do. We are well-intentioned and attempting to do a better job, but I want to hear from people who are on this call and elsewhere about ways that we can improve.
That's great. It is 9:57. AJ, do you want to answer this one? Great.
Oh, no, actually,
Okay.
I think they did a great job.
Great. Great. So that's it. That's all the time we have. I feel sort of devastated that we can't answer every possible question because I so appreciate this conversation. And I really appreciate that AJ and Susan and David were all active in the chat and answering questions, and that you all were asking such fabulous questions. I just want to highlight that we do have some resources that we will share out afterwards, some of which we mentioned on the call and some of which we didn't. If there are other ones that were in the chat, we can try to coalesce that too before we send it out. But I want to take again a moment to thank Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare and to thank to our panelists, David Dahl from the Maine Monitor, AJ Douglas from Fox Bangor, ABC7, and Susan Sharon from Maine Public. If you want to give them accolades in the chat too for their time today, they are obviously very busy people. And so to take the extra time out this morning and ahead of time to kind of prepare for this, I really appreciate it. We do have a post-event survey, so please fill that out. It'll get emailed to you and it may be in the chat as well. If you have other questions about this or about advocacy in general, feel free to email me. My email is on here, and get in touch with us at nonprofitmaine.org if you have any questions. We have a team of people who can help answer questions about this and any number of other things related to nonprofit work. So thank you all for being here today. And if you have any ideas about what events you want next, if we do another advocacy series, I would love to hear it. Thanks again, and we will see you later. Bye, folks.
Yeah.